So hey everybody. Jonathan Weber has had an emergency tonight, so he's not going to be able to deliver this webinar, unfortunately. So I'm going to try to fill in for him. This is the first webinar I've ever tried to host, so please bear with me. We will give this another minute and then we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, so I think we've got a good number of folks who are online here. Again, unfortunately, Jonathan Weber is not going to be able to present this webinar tonight. He's had a family emergency. So I will be filling in for him. My name is Susan Grasso. I work in the Complete Streets program with Jonathan at Locomotion. This will be my first time hosting a webinar, so filling in for him at the last minute. So again, please bear with me. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here tonight. Jonathan and I have spent quite a bit of time pulling together the material for this learning event, and we hope you'll find it useful. So a few housekeeping details before we get started. This webinar is expected to last an hour. I plan to stop at a couple of points throughout to give you a chance to ask questions, and then again at the end of the presentation. You can also feel free to put questions and comments in the chat box at any time. If you have any technical issues, please post them in the chat box, and I'll try to pay attention to that as I go. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll share the recording with you in the next few days, along with some resources that we put together related to tonight's presentation. So tonight, we're going to be talking about traffic calming with a focus on more rural areas and lower cost solutions. So we've got a lot of material here to cover, so let's get started. So Locomotion's mission is to make it safe, accessible, and fun for everyone to bike, walk, and roll in Vermont. We are the only Vermont's only statewide walking, biking, and rolling advocacy organization. And our mission is a big goal, and our success really depends on Vermonters like you who are working to make change in our communities. So one of the ways that we support you here at Locomotion in making change in your community is through educational resources like this webinar tonight. This is the fourth in a 5-part series that we've been hosting this winter and spring. So this series takes the knowledge that our staff has and distills it down to the most essential things for you to know to be successful. Our first webinar set the stage for advocacy work by considering the broad changes needed for a community to become more walkable, bikeable, and rollable. Our second webinar explored why communities need to create a plan for investing in walk, bike, and roll infrastructure, policies, and programs. Our third webinar looked at funding opportunities for active transportation infrastructure in Vermont. And our last webinar discussed how and why to build good bike parking. I will eventually put a link in the chat where you can find these previous webinars. So they have all been pre-recorded and are available on our website. So tonight's webinar is really about 3 things. First, we'll define traffic calming so that we're all on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish. And then we're going to talk about what influences driver behavior and ultimately safety. And then finally, we will look at some specific traffic calming strategies with a particular focus on lower cost approaches and options that can work in rural areas. So here's our definition of traffic calming. Traffic calming is the use of design strategies to slow and/or reduce the volume of motor vehicles in a location. When successful, traffic calming brings many benefits, which can include improve safety and quality of place, increase use of walking, biking, and rolling, greater economic activity, and reduce demand for enforcement. The last word used in our definition was location. So where is traffic calming appropriate? Essentially, it's appropriate anywhere that the current design of the street or road is inducing drivers to go faster than is appropriate for the context. So common points where traffic calming is needed are transition zones between rural and urban areas, or transitions between rural areas and village centers. Also within village centers, around schools, on neighborhood streets, on rural roads used by people walking and biking, and at crosswalks and intersections. Now that we've established what traffic calming is and what it can achieve, we're going to learn more about the things we're trying to change, which is driver behavior and speed. So I think a major point of this webinar is don't blame the human, blame the design. The speed at which people drive is mostly determined by cues that we take from the roadway and the surrounding context. That includes things like the width of the road overall and the lane widths, how close buildings and trees are to the road, how intersections are designed, and more. Generally, straight and wide designs send driver signals that high speeds are okay, while narrow, more constricted designs will signal to drivers that they need to go slower. So no doubt about it, there are reckless drivers. But when most drivers are going above the speed limit, that's not an indication that something is wrong with the humans driving. It's an indication that the design of the road is giving those drivers cues that are not aligned with the surrounding context and how fast we want cars going. Education and public service announcements have a very limited real effect in and of themselves. So we can think about driving as toggling between two systems. This is based on work by Daniel Kahneman, who identified two functions of the human mind and described them as system 1 and system 2 type thinking. So system 1 thinking has to do with responses that are fast and intuitive, such as muscle memory. System 1 thinking allows us to save mental energy by responding to situations using mental shortcuts based on previous experiences and learned patterns. We don't have to think about what 2 + 2 equals because we just know it. If we're used to getting on our bike, we don't need to think about how to do it because we know how. System 2's type thinking is the slower, more deliberate mode that our minds switch into when navigating a complicated or new situation, like parallel parking or adding large numbers. So we can think about driving as toggling between these two systems. When it comes to driving, which system we are in is largely determined by our perception of risk. In simplified context, like a highway, motorists are more likely to perceive less risk and apply system 1 thinking to their driving decisions. In this context, we can have a good conversation with someone else in the car, we can listen to a podcast, etc. Our body and mind are performing the operation of driving in a relatively subconscious way, and so we can do other things at the same time. This is generally safe when we're in a simplified environment where we don't need to do things like predict what other road users are going to do. System 2 driving is engaged when we perceive a higher level of risk in our environment. This engages drivers in a more slow and effortful mode of operation, in which they are more actively looking for hazards and predicting what others might do. So in this mode, you usually can't do much more than drive. Conversation will often stop. You might turn down the music or podcast to focus on driving. You become more focused. So this graph applies system 1 and system 2 driving to give us a framework through which we can understand the interaction between car speeds and the surrounding environment and how this contributes to danger or safety. Speed is on the y-axis. An environment in which cars are moving at a high speed is not necessarily dangerous in and of itself. Complexity is on the x-axis. An environment in which there's a great deal of complexity and unpredictability, like a parking lot or a downtown street, is also not necessarily dangerous in and of itself. Roads are high-speed, low-complexity environments. The design of the road is simplified to make driving at higher speeds safer. There are few intersections, and at highway speeds, people outside of cars are usually not allowed. Drivers operate in System 1 in this kind of environment, and it's relatively safe. Streets are platforms for a community to exist and create social and economic prosperity. This is an environment with a lot of complexity where people are crossing the street, trucks are stopping to make deliveries, maybe there's trash pickup happening. The design of a street signals to drivers that they need to pay attention and go slowly, which puts them into System 2. This again is relatively safe. A STROAD mixes design elements from both roads and streets. These areas are often wide and straight with many lanes. Development is usually set back from the road, and yet there's complexity resulting from the development, which requires driveways and intersections, and there are sometimes people walking and biking. So in a STROAD environment, the road-esque design puts drivers into System 1 and encourages higher speeds, but the development introduces elements of complexity that result in danger when mixed with that speed. A STROAD does not have to be in a suburban area, and you can have sections or even intersections in downtowns or village centers that are more STROAD-like. These are often areas that require traffic calming. So effective traffic calming is essentially about recognizing the points where the design of the roadway is cueing drivers to be in System 1, and then changing design factors to switch the drivers into System 2. Thank you for the shout out, Melody. I appreciate that. So we're going to pause right now and take a break and see if you have any questions about this first part of the webinar. And Bob, yes, we will make the slides available. And STROADs are my mortal enemies. They are mine as well, Joel. Thank you for that comment. So please, if you could use the webinar chat for questions, it'll be easier for me to monitor that. Okay, then we will move on and talk about, get right into the low-cost traffic calming strategies. So remember that what we're doing here is looking for strategies that in a given context can take a driver from System 1 to System 2 thinking processes and getting them driving and paying attention in a way that is appropriate for the context. We're mostly focused on lower cost strategies here and mostly focused on strategies more applicable to rural roads, or rural areas, but keep in mind that cost and rural applicability are going to mean different things to different communities. So we've organized traffic calming strategies into two different categories. The first considers tactics for slowing speeds along corridors, and the second looks at strategies for slowing speeds and increasing car yielding at intersections and street crossings. So we're going to start with the corridor strategies, and then I'll pause and see if you have any questions, and then we'll move on to the intersection and street crossings strategies. So first we have reducing the speed limit, which is a popular first place to start for advocates. So speed limits are generally set based on what's called the 85th percentile speed. So if you took a sample of 100 drivers, the 85th percentile speed would be the speed below which 85 of those 100 drivers are traveling. That means that 15 drivers out of 100 are driving above the posted speed limit or above the 85th percentile speed. So in this way, speed limits that are based on 85th percentile speed reflect the operating speed of the roadway, or the speed that people actually go. If the posted speed limit matches the 85th percentile speed, then in some cases, reducing the posted speed limit can have a traffic calming effect. Research suggests that drivers will comply with speed limits that are set 5 miles per hour below the 85th percentile speed, maybe a little bit more, but much more than that, and drivers tend to ignore posted speed limit signs because the fast road conditions are just too inviting. So if a community wants to set posted speed limits that are much below the existing 85th percentile actual operating speed, then they will need to support the new target speed limit with a road design that encourages that speed. So the corridor treatments in the following slides can be paired with lowered speed limits to bring about those slower speeds. So while we're on the topic of speed limit setting, you all should be aware that changes are happening at both the state and federal level regarding how speed limits are set. We'll keep you posted on changes that affect your options to control posted speed limits in your communities. So in Vermont for now, the minimum allowable speed limit on local roads is 25 miles per hour, except for within state designated downtowns where it can be lower. So a speed feedback sign is like a speed limit sign, but on steroids. These signs have built-in technology to indicate to drivers how fast they're going, or in some cases, simply tell them that they're going too fast. So speed radar signs can be installed either as portable units or permanently placed. But either way, they're pretty expensive. They are, though, very effective as they can reduce speeds between 5 to 7 miles per hour in the area near the sign. They do need a power source and regular maintenance to keep them in good working order. Plus, a potential downside is that motorists can become immune to them if they don't feel a risk of enforcement. So you might want to pair this treatment with some intermittent police presence. Next up is a strategy known as centerline removal. So that ubiquitous double yellow line on our streets and roads, they may actually encourage people to drive faster. So there hasn't been a lot of research done on this yet, but preliminary research indicates that in certain situations, removing the center line can reduce traffic speed. Speed reductions between 5 to 7 miles per hour are possible. So the explanation for the observed traffic calming effect is due to the addition of an element of uncertainty, which is thought to naturally reduce speeds. So drivers come upon a situation like that and are sort of surprised not to have that double yellow line present, which causes them to pay more attention and slow down. With striping, motorists feel more confident about where their space is, triggering that system one more automatic pilot driving style, which again manifests itself in increased speeds. So removing an existing center line isn't complicated. It can be done by just grinding it off, or it can simply be allowed to fade and not be repainted. Centerline removal is not only a low-cost treatment, but it has some additional benefits. It actually provides a cost savings for towns because it reduces the amount of line striping that needs to be done. And it also helps preserve Vermont's rural character, which is important to many communities. Centerline removal is a treatment strategy that can't be used everywhere. A centerline is required if the road has 3 or more lanes, or has 6,000 or more vehicles a day and is at least 20 feet in width. Winooski actually is currently exploring the use of the strategy on a few of its streets. Note that your town does need to inform VTrans if it doesn't want a center lane striped on its Class 2 roads, because the state contracts with towns to have all Class 2 town highways striped. So planting trees and other landscape vegetation alongside the road and the buffer space between sidewalks and roadways creates a visual tunnel effect, narrowing the driver's field of view, which encourages slower speeds. Investing in street trees and plantings has the added benefit of improving the aesthetics of a town for everyone to enjoy. A pleasant environment will encourage more walking and biking in the community, and it can also really tie nicely with more general community development goals. Not much is known about how effective this strategy is for traffic calming alone. It's usually recommended to be a part of a more comprehensive traffic calming program. So the example shown here is from Burlington on Riverside Avenue. Next up, we have edge lane roads. These are also called advisory shoulders or advisory lanes. With an edge lane road, the car lanes are combined into a shared center lane, ranging from as little as 10 feet up to about 18 feet in width. This creates usable shoulders for people walking and biking on roads that would otherwise be too narrow to accommodate that use. So when drivers encounter each other, they shift into the edge lanes to pass each other as needed. And if people are walking or biking in the edge lane, then drivers must yield to them. All of this contributes to a calmer and safer road that accommodates people driving, walking, and biking. Edge lane roads are appropriate for low volume roads, having low to moderate speeds up to about 35 miles per hour. While they're common in Europe, they're actually currently not approved for use in the United States, while the Federal Highway Administration evaluates safety data from an experimental study. We're hoping that this treatment is approved for use soon because we see a lot of potential for this strategy on our rural roads here in Vermont. The example shown in the slide is of an edge lane road on the Queen City Park Road in Burlington, which participated in the federal experimental program several years ago. Edge lane roads were also tested in Danville and Lincoln during this testing period. Edge lane roads can be approximated by combining centerline removal with lane narrowing to create space for people using the shoulders and to slow motor vehicles. Shelburne is actually planning an experiment of this type on Falls Road in their village center this summer. So I mentioned lane narrowing in the last slide. Lane narrowing is a reduction of car travel lane widths. This treatment can reduce speeds and improve road safety in some contexts, but the relationship between speed, travel lane width, and safety is really quite complicated, and the result of lane narrowing can vary greatly in different contexts. A recent comprehensive study by the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health concluded that narrower traffic lanes can improve road safety. A major finding was that roads with 10 to 12-foot lanes and 30 to 35 mile per hour speed limits have a significantly higher number of crashes compared to those with narrower 9-foot lanes. They concluded that the best candidates for lane width reduction projects are streets with 11 to 13-foot lanes in urban areas with speeds of 20 to 35 miles per hour, as long as they are not used for heavy freight or transit. Vermont is actually one of the few states that technically allow car travel lanes on state roads to be striped as narrow as 9 feet, but in practice, they typically stripe lanes to 11 to 12 feet. Local communities should be comfortable experimenting with lane widths at 10 feet and even 9 feet, depending on context. An obvious added benefit of lane narrowing is that it can provide shoulder space that can be used by people walking and biking. And the example shown here is a demonstration project of narrowing car travel lanes in combination with different kinds of protection for walking and biking that took place on Spear Street in Shelburne last summer. So in contrast to lane narrowing, lane reduction is about reducing the actual number of car travel lanes on a multi-lane road. This treatment is often referred to as a road diet, most typically converting 4 travel lanes to 3, which provides a travel lane in each direction plus a center turn lane. The extra space no longer needed for the 4th lane can be used to create bike lanes or shoulders. These 4 to 3 lane conversions have been shown to be very effective, reducing speeds by about 5 miles per hour and reducing crashes by something like 40 to 50%. They can also be relatively inexpensive if the conversion is accomplished using pavement markings within the existing public right-of-way. We also recommend that when these conversions are considered, that they be paired with lane narrowing to increase their effectiveness. The need for turning lanes should also be given serious consideration based on all users of the road, not just motorists, because they create uncomfortable and unpleasant conditions for people at street crossings, including longer crossing distances and the loss of bike lanes approaching intersections. The occasional pauses that drivers must make to accommodate turning vehicles can create positive friction in traffic flow, helping to keep speeding in check. On streets where turning lanes are really necessary, it's important to ensure that intersections or mid-block crossings are designed with pedestrian safety and comfort enhancements, which we're going to talk about in the next section. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to look at treatments that involve the shoulder space. Bike lanes can help calm traffic when they're coupled with a reduction in lane widths or number of lanes for motor vehicles. And the presence of people in the bike lane also helps to slow traffic. So there's a safety and numbers effect at play here as well. Protected bike lanes provide additional separation between people biking and driving, often by using delineator posts or concrete curbing. These types of bike lanes are more likely to slow traffic because of the presence of physical barriers alongside the travel lane. Reductions of speed from 8 to 16% can be expected depending on the application. Bike lane width should be about 5 feet or even 6 feet to appeal to all ages and abilities, with a preferred buffer width of 3 feet or more for vertical protection. The cost to create a protected bike lane is much less than the cost to create an off-road shared use path, and much easier if it is placed in the public right-of-way, but it can still be pricey if the length of the corridor is very long. In addition, there are maintenance concerns that have to be addressed for protected bike lanes. Delineator posts are often removed to allow for easier winter plowing, and where protection is provided year-round, accommodations need to be made to ensure that the bike lane is plowed in the winter and otherwise swept clean of debris, and this could require the use of special equipment. The shoulder can also be used to provide space for people walking when a sidewalk isn't present. Painted walking lanes are an inexpensive way to designate shoulder space for pedestrian use, and these can include pedestrian markings on the lane itself. This treatment is suitable for low to moderate speed roads, and we suggest that it be paired with lane narrowing or centerline removal to provide more space for pedestrian use and to slow down travel speeds. The example shown here is from a quick build project in Northfield that connects the downtown to a nearby park and neighborhoods. Shoulder widening is often considered in rural areas as a way to make space for people walking and biking in an otherwise too narrow roadway. This requires the addition of new pavement at the sides of the road to create a wider overall cross-section, as opposed to lane narrowing, which repurposes existing pavement to create wider shoulders for walking and biking. In Vermont, paved road shoulders are considered bike lanes, even if unmarked, and they can also be used by pedestrians if sidewalks are not present. Rumble strips and or contrasting or colored pavement materials along especially dangerous sections of the road could be considered with shoulder widening to reduce the risk of roadway departure of motor vehicles. The downside to shoulder widening is that because the roadway is getting wider overall, it can result in higher speeds. So that's a trade-off, but sometimes, creating that separated space for walking and biking is worth that trade-off. To offset the impact of speeds caused by shoulder widening, lane narrowing should just about always be attempted before adding new pavement to get bigger shoulders. This has the added benefit of not increasing the amount of impervious surfaces in communities, which supports local and state efforts to address our changing climate. The example shown in the slide is from a repaving project along Route 7 in Charlotte and Shelburne a few years ago that included shoulder widening. Shoulders in this location are on the order of 10 feet. Next up are side paths. These are two-way protected bike lanes on one side of the road that create a bidirectional shared use path. Side paths can offer a very low stress experience as compared to traditional bike lanes because they usually provide for more separation and protection. This treatment also very efficiently uses space because it requires only one buffer, which helps also to reduce the cost. It's especially cost effective if a side path can be created on existing pavement. So this was the case for the side path shown in this picture. It was created as part of a lane reduction project, which converted a two-way road to a one-way, with the remaining space used for a side path. And this is the Webster Road connector in Shelburne. Side path widths can range from 8 to 14 feet, and the buffer should ideally be at least 3 feet, although narrower ones are sometimes used. Overall, this is a highly effective treatment, but they can pose design challenges at intersections or where they transition to other types of bike facilities. So they do need to be, well thought through. So speed tables are asphalt or rubber mounds with flattened tops that cover the full width of the roadway. The flat top is typically long enough for the entire wheelbase of a passenger car to rest on, so they're quite different from speed humps or bumps. Raised crosswalks are similar, except that they are placed at pedestrian crossings, simultaneously slowing speeds and allowing pedestrians to be more easily seen. Speed tables should be considered more of a corridor treatment and raised crosswalks more of an intersection treatment, but we've combined them here because of their similar design and impact on speed. Both treatments slow vehicles down because they vertically displace them, and they are both quite effective with speed reductions of up to 10 miles per hour possible. Speed tables and raised crosswalks are commonly preferred over speed humps because they are less disruptive to motor vehicles, especially emergency vehicles. So next up are community gateways. These are landscaped sign installations that announce to motorists that they're leaving a rural area and entering a community where land use, pedestrian use, motor vehicle activities will be more intense. Gateway signs should be placed in areas where a reduction in speed is desired. Some data suggests that average speed reductions of about 5 miles per hour can be associated with this treatment. Gateway signs also can align with community development goals to highlight a sense of place. The example shown here is from Danville. In this case, the gateway treatment is combined with other vertical elements like the light post and fencing and lane narrowing by pavement markings to cue the driver that the road context is changing and that they're entering a settlement of some kind. The cost of this treatment varies greatly depending on how involved the gateway design is and the extent to which other complementary elements are included. Maintenance needs include keeping the sign in good repair and keeping up with associated landscaping and mowing. And next we have chicanes. Chicanes are designed to convert straight segments of roadway into curved ones by essentially creating staggered curb extensions. They can be installed using curbing or landscaping. They can also be created by alternating parking from side to side, or even by alternating parallel parking and perpendicular parking. Chicanes can be effective at reducing speeds by about 2.5 to 6 miles per hour. They might be appropriate for some rural main streets, but if there's a high percentage of truck traffic, curb overtopping could be a problem, so that would have to be considered. Communities could also think about installing seasonal chicanes to reduce the maintenance effort associated with winter snow removal. You probably noticed that we've been sharing local examples of the strategies included in this webinar. Jonathan and I are not aware of this treatment strategy having been applied anywhere in Vermont. So if you know of an example of a chicane, we would love to hear about it. So up until now, we've been talking mostly about strategies to reduce speed, but slow-moving traffic at high enough volumes can still create conditions that are uncomfortable and unattractive for riding bikes and mixed traffic. So it's important to think about whether traffic volumes need to be managed too. Using modal filters to create filtered permeability does just that. Filtered permeability is the idea that you can filter out cut-through car traffic on selected streets to create a more attractive environment for walking and biking while maintaining accessibility for residents, deliveries, trash collection, or emergencies. Modal filters are the different ways that you can do that. When properly applied, this is a great way to provide on-road, low-stress conditions for people walking and biking with no impediments. The potential downside is that it may lead to higher traffic volumes on other roads. This highlights the need for thinking about the road network holistically for all modes of transportation and understanding the purpose of the various roads in your community as you think about effective design changes. Modal filters can be as simple as a barricade sign to gates, bollards, planters, curbs, concrete blocks. Bollards can even be flexible and bend on impact with a motor vehicle, which can allow emergency access. In this example, also from Shelburne, large boulders and grass were used to prevent traffic from Shelburne Farms cutting through this neighborhood to access Route 7. People can easily continue to use these residential streets for walking and biking. So that was a mouthful. We're going to pause here for some questions before we move on to treatments for intersections and crossings. Okay, so Michael, I think there are plans to install chicanes on the notch this year. That would be awesome. We'll be sure to track that. The new parking design on Archibald Street in Burlington is a kind of chicane. Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but we'll look into that as well. Thank you. When will Vermont decide if the edge lane was effective and allow it to continue? It's my understanding that the edge lanes were removed from Lincoln and I'm drawing a blank on the second community where it was tested, but it is still in practice in existence in Burlington. As far as I know, there are no plans to remove it. And I think before we really encourage that strategy to be adopted widely, we're going to have to wait for the Federal Highway Administration to give their approval for that. I hope that answers your question, Christy. Yes, and Lincoln. Yeah, Christy, please share a comment about what you thought about the edge lanes in Lincoln if you had a chance to experience them. Thanks, Paul, for your comment. Does Vermont have any legal definition of these road types like Strode? That's a really good question. As far as I know, they do not. I do know that Burlington has attempted to classify their streets in this kind of context, really thinking about who the intended users, what modes are really intended to be using those streets are. So that might be a place that you could look. I believe Shelburne is starting to do the same thing. There are probably other communities also. So if you guys have information about that, please pop that in the chat. And Joel, a common argument against speed tables is that emergency services will be slowed down. Portland, Oregon did a study with speed cushions, which have cutoffs for wide wheelbases. Yes. Do you know if the option for speed cushions has been explored in Vermont? I actually do not know of examples in Vermont where speed cushions have been explored. If you guys do, please again, pop that in the chat. I do know that, as I said earlier, Shelburne is working on a traffic calming makeover for Falls Road in between Church Street and Route 7, if you're familiar with their community. And as part of that, they are planning to use speed cushions. So we'll be able to have more real world experience to share with all of you after that project is complete. I think they have made, Sally says, I think they may have needed parking in Lincoln. I guess maybe that's why those edge lanes were removed. Danville, yes, was the other community to try edge lanes and they worked great. That's good to hear. Colorado has had pretty decent success with speed cushions. That's really good to hear. I'm sure Shelburne will be happy to hear that. And they've been used in Gatineau, Quebec on a bus route. Great. So thank you so much for those comments and questions. And we will jump back into the webinar. Okay, so as I said, next up, we're going to look at strategies for slowing speeds and creating more comfortable conditions for people walking and biking across streets. Intersections and other street crossings are often the locations that make an otherwise safe and comfortable walking or biking trip so stressful that people avoid traveling to otherwise desirable destinations. So let's take a look at some of these now. So the in-street pedestrian crossing sign helps improve yielding at crosswalks. These may also have a traffic calming effect since they are a physical object in the middle of the road and they create a visual narrowing of the lane. In-street pedestrian crossing signs are typically used on roads with posted speed limits of 30 miles per hour or less, although they can be used effectively on some 35-mile-per-hour roads here in Vermont. Actually, on two-lane roads, VTrans guidance allows them up to 40 miles per hour. This is a low-cost solution that is quite effective at increasing yielding at crosswalks. The signs are frequently moved out of place, so they need to be monitored by the municipality. It's been my experience that it's not uncommon for people living near the crosswalk to take the initiative in putting them back in place. I believe some municipalities have actually organized neighborhood volunteers to do that. It's also not uncommon for towns to have to replace a few each year because of damage that they sustain from motor vehicles, although they're typically designed to bend if struck. Most communities do remove these during the winter months to avoid snow plowing issues. And I do just want to point out that the placement of this in-street pedestrian crossing in the image in the slide is incorrect. It should really be placed outside of the crosswalk so that we don't impede pedestrians that are using the crosswalk. So just outside of the crosswalk on the center line or the center of the road is where they should be placed. So pavement materials. Textured surfaces include the use of materials like brick pavers, cobblestones, or textured concrete to cue motorists that they're in a more people-oriented place that has the potential for pedestrian activity. They're often used in conjunction with other traffic calming elements. So in addition to their visual quality, textured pavements can also generate noise and a physical sensation, causing drivers to slow down. Some studies suggest that speed reductions of up to 9 miles per hour are possible when applying surface treatments like these. In this example shown here from Warren, recovery funds from Hurricane Irene were used to both improve Warren's sense of place and calm traffic using a combination of brick pavers, gray cobblestone, granite curbing and bollards, and landscaping. One consideration with this strategy is how the choice of pavement materials affect comfort, safety, and visibility for people on bikes or people who are using mobility assistance devices. So textured surfaces might be better kept to smaller sections or combined with smoother, more visible surface treatments. Street art is similar to use of textured pavements, except that the road surface is painted to draw attention to the fact that something about the roadway is changing. It's also used to both encourage slower speeds and create a sense of place. Street art is often placed at the center of an intersection, but it can also be located in other sections of the street and mid-block locations. Federal guidelines require that designs do not copy, hide, or otherwise interfere with traffic control devices. Installing street art is usually not very expensive, and it can be moderately effective in slowing traffic. However, plans should be made to maintain the street art or permanently remove it when it begins to fade to prevent it from becoming an eyesore. Curb extensions, also called bump outs or bulb outs, extend the sidewalk into the roadway to shorten the crossing distance of the road. Car parking close to crosswalks can create hazards by obscuring the sight line between drivers and people about to cross. So curb extensions can help to address this by shifting the parking away from the crosswalk. Curb extensions have been found to reduce speeds by about 2.5 miles per hour, but they're very effective at increasing the comfort people feel when walking because of the shortened crossing distances. They can be expensive, however, due to the cost of relocating curbs, but you can use painted curb extensions or temporary materials like planters, rocks, and flex posts to create these. So crosswalks at our locations that don't have signals or stop signs can be made safer if they are marked with painted crosswalk lines and accompanied by pedestrian warning signs. But sometimes even more than that is needed to increase driver awareness of pedestrians in the crosswalk. In this case, rectangular rapid flashing beacons or RRFBs are a possible solution. So these are pedestrian warning signs that include 2 rectangular shaped yellow lights that flash when a pedestrian pushes a button. RRFBs can also be equipped with voice messages to indicate to pedestrians that the light is flashing. It can be sometimes hard for pedestrians to see that the light is flashing. These are not really a traffic calming device, but they are effective at getting motorists to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk in most cases. Yielding rates up to 98% have been observed, as well as a 47% reduction in crashes involving pedestrians. But this, again, will vary depending on the location, posted speed limit, number of travel lanes, pedestrian crossing distance, and other things. RRFBs cost on the order of $15,000 to $20,000 and they do need a power source and regular inspection to ensure reliable operation. So a pedestrian island is a median with a refuge area that is intended to help protect pedestrians who are crossing a road. They usually narrow the travel lane at the roadway center line and separate opposing traffic movements. Like bump outs, a pedestrian safety island reduces the exposure time experienced by a person crossing the street. This becomes increasingly important as the number of travel lane increases because pedestrians feel more exposed and less safe as the width of the crossing increases. The island also enables a person crossing to only monitor oncoming traffic on one side of the island at a time, as opposed to needing to wait for a gap for all lanes of traffic to yield. Pedestrian islands are a more expensive treatment because they involve the construction of new curbing, but they can reduce crashes by 44%. Traffic circles are also called mini circles or mini roundabouts. They're raised islands in the center of an unsignalized intersection. They typically replace the use of 2- or 4-way stop signs. Where regular traffic circles can easily be over 100 feet in diameter, mini circles are typically on the order of 10 feet in diameter. And the way they work to calm traffic is that they physically force traffic to slow as cars navigate the curve through or around the intersection. Mini circles have been found to reduce car crashes up to 93% in some locations. And I believe Winooski will also be considering adding some mini circles on some of their more residential streets. Okay, so yeah, that's what I have for you tonight. So thanks for listening. And we'll go back to the chat and see if you all have any more questions or comments. Christy says she has struck those crosswalk signs, looking right to left, and they are behind the side mirror view. Well, I hope you didn't sustain any damage on that. But yes, that can happen. And Christy also, the Lincoln Edge lane, was useful where limited two-way visibility was a problem. On straightaway South Lincoln Road may not have been as successful. That's interesting. I would like to see coming off Lincoln Gap Road, past the school and through town, past the store and intersection with crosswalk. Well, as soon as we get the go-ahead to recommend these, we will be looking at a lot of different potential applications for it. And thanks so much, Joel. Thank you guys. Appreciate the support, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. Again, you will receive a recording of this webinar and the slides and some additional resources. So thank you again for attending tonight, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.